Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I hope my audio is okay. Maraming salamat po ulit for deciding to join us this morning para sa kauna-unahan pong webinar series ng Office for the Advancement of Teaching at mamayang hapon naman po yung Interactive Learning Center. Ako po si Ton Clemente. I will be presenting yun pong ating topic for this morning. At kasama po natin ngayong umaga ay yung ilan pong support team ng Office for the Advancement of Teaching, sina Daisy Agaw at sina Joy Fulientes. Okay? At makakasama rin po natin bilang moderator natin si Dr. Jonel Labor. Sir Janelle, can you say hello, please, and good morning to our participants? We have 86 so far.
Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat at thank you for being here.
So ito po yung topic of our conversation for this morning, preparing courses for remote learning. Okay po? So we will break that down in a bit. So what we're trying to communicate here this morning is the task is daunting and the task is challenging. But together, hopefully po, with this webinar, this will be a start for us as we prepare our courses this mid-year and also this first semester. Okay po. Let's start with our webinar goals. So for this morning, we have 3. I will be providing you a brief context of what we can expect this first semester, AY 2021. And then yung bulk po of the presentation will be a discussion of the preparations that faculty need to make for the incoming academic year. Okay? And through our Q&A, we hope to address as many concerns as possible related to remote learning. No? So top of mind po na concern, ito pong Arts and Letters cluster na ito. Isa sa mga major concerns talaga ay yung skills-based courses or production-based courses or equipment-heavy courses. No? I don't have all the answers to these concerns, and maybe through this, I will try to provide a few, but maybe through this conversation po, mas mabubuo natin kung paano natin maituturo yung mga kurso na yan. Okay, what will change? No? I hope you can see my slide. It's more classroom management this semester than teaching as we know it, which is a little bit more, delivery, instructional delivery in the classroom. And so ibig sabihin po, we will expect that we can just watch our class go even with minimal intervention. So kung dati po, we can get away with a lot of improvisation, a lot of winging it, and maybe thinking about an activity or exercise an hour before class. So now we are, pwede pa rin naman po yan, but now we are invited to be more deliberate in the way that we conduct our classes. We are invited to be, to plan a little bit more ahead, because we have to kind of buffer for contingencies. So maybe there will be more classroom management this semester, but ang hindi po magbabago ay if you've ever taught a class before, if you've ever run a workshop before, we are still designers or curators of the learning experience. Hindi po yan magbabago. And in fact, the product of our design is our syllabi. No? So it might be good to begin with the end in mind. So as designers or curators, what learning experience can we give our students, barring any constraints that we currently have? So here po I'm presenting to you the revised student evaluation of teachers. I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but there's an OVP-AA memo about this, so I will not get into detail. I made a crude clustering po of the items. Our SET now has only 15 items. And if you think about it, the way that we are assessed dun sa pag-design natin centers on general principles and skills that are transferable. So for instance, yung idea ng fairness. So kasama na po dyan yung procedural fairness, or yung distributive fairness, yung grades na binibigay natin sa students natin, or yung more interpersonal fairness, respecting students' diversity. There's also sections on teaching competence, yung ability natin to engage our students, or yung very practical concern of making full use of that 3 units that we have. And then finally po, yung warmth. Yung ability natin to encourage students to answer in our Mentimeter, for instance, or yung ating availability for consultation. So itong fairness, itong teaching competence, itong warmth, these are some of the things that we can still bring to our remote learning kahit na wala na tayo sa classroom. Okay. So I will start. Kanina pa ako I will start. Para ito na yung third start ko. Ano po? No, so let's proceed with a bit of context. Very quick lang po ito. So I think hopefully by this time, mas klaro na po sa atin that remote learning is not necessarily equivalent to online learning. Yung remote learning po is the idea that we are teaching and learning and facilitating knowledge or knowledge acquisition na physically distant tayo from our students. So, yun po yung idea. So, hindi siya necessarily kailangan technology-based or technology-supported all the time. Hindi siya kailangan full blast online in the sense that, you have to meet your students via Zoom. So, yung keyword po talaga ay remote. Malayo tayo sa isa't isa. But, online learning is one way of delivering remote learning. O pwede po natin isipin na technology-supported or technology-assisted learning. In fact, baka hindi naman na po ito bago sa atin yung idea ng online learning. If we've ever asked our students to watch a YouTube video, for instance, so homework nila is to watch a YouTube video, and then we process it when we see each other sa next meeting. That is an example of partly online learning. If we've asked our students to submit something via email or via UVLE, so may components na po yan ng online learning. So there are things that we've done before that we can probably reinforce, and there are things that we might need to learn so that mas buo yung ating remote learning experience this first sem. So nag-conduct po ng OVCAA survey. Hindi ko po alam kung nakasagot po kayo nito. We did this way back, I think sometime in April, to gauge po the readiness of our faculty and students. And based on that survey, and of course, ang caveat po ng surveys ito is that, we might not be able to reach faculty and students without any internet connection. But at least those who answered, their preferred mode for delivering lessons po ay yung top, email. Tapos yung 2 and 3 po yung shared drive and a learning management system. So pag tignan po natin yung preferred mode for receiving lessons ng ating students, yung top 2 po nila ay email. So, at yung second po yung idea ng shared drive. So, if we're going to think of remote learning, then yung least common denominator ng experience that we can create ay maximizing the use of email, which I will mention later. So, ano po yung message nung first few slides na yan? So, in preparing for remote learning, the thing is, we might need to maximize email. If yung challenge nga po dyan ay, how can we run an entire course exclusively on email if need be? Kung yun lang po talaga yung tanging paraan that we can reach all of our students. At the same time, we can also maximize the use of UVLE. Kung makikita niyo po as a shared drive or as an online experience, UVLE is very powerful and can do a lot of the things we need for remote learning. Kaya I highly invite you po later this afternoon, there's a workshop on how to use UVLE. Kindly attend. We can just use the same link that we used for this webinar. And then third, it might be good to maximize the effort in preparing for the courses. And po yung sabihin, think of it this way. Our courses, the way that we're going to design them now, isipin natin, can this be borrowed by a state university or a state college somewhere na nangangapa din like us, no? But they will look up to us kasi sabihin nila, anong ginagawa ng UP, no? So think of it that way. Can this be an open educational resource that we can share to others? Can this be publicized online? Of course, with the necessary licensing para, we can still own our work, but that's the idea. At the same time, maximizing in the sense that, is this something that we can use in the succeeding semesters, or modify in the succeeding semesters? And then fourth, ito talaga yung aking mantra, to minimize drastic changes as much as possible. Remote learning is a major change. It's difficult, and because it's difficult, we're resisting it. I'm partly resisting it, but because we have no choice, let's just minimize the changes. So big change na yung remote. So yung mga bells and whistles sa klase, pwede siguro baka ma-minimize muna, and let's focus on the essentials and what we can given the resources that we have. Okay po? Okay, let's proceed to the bulk of this presentation. Sorry. So ang main message po ay, when we design our courses, it should be the most flexible to buffer for unexpected shocks. So for instance, we've been hearing a lot about 12-week semester. Paano po kung biglang hindi pala siya ma-approve ng BOR all of a sudden? We don't know these things. Or all of a sudden, lahat pala ng mga infrastructure na pinaplano, hindi pala siya mangyari. So we think in ano yung kaya nating ma-shift as much as possible to buffer for these unexpected shocks. Or yung happy unexpected shock would be, wala ng COVID sa August. So then, we can go back to the classroom. So that might be a good kind of shock. There. Okay, so let's now talk about prep. I think a lot of our resistance to remote learning is that there's so much work. Parang it's so daunting. Isipin pa lang natin, oh my God, dami i-check, dami i-prep. So let's try to find a way to ease our burden a bit. So ang unang tanong dyan ay, marami nga bang i-prep? So dun sa webinar ni Dr. Patricia Arinto, she's the current dean of UP Visayas Tacloban College. And she used to be dean ng Faculty of Education in Open University. So this is a very helpful webinar. I strongly suggest that for more webinars this day, panoorin po natin siya. It's a short webinar, 40 minutes, isang K-drama episode. So ito po yung 4 tasks natin na kailangan gawin for remote learning. So first, analysis of learner and learning context. 2, planning content and mode of delivery. 3, curating learning resources and designing learning activities. 4, executing assessment. Okay, so if we're going to look at this list, mapapaisip tayo, ito, dahil nakapagturo na ako before, these are tasks that I've done before. No? So yung idea po ay, wala naman necessarily magbabago doon sa main task natin as a teacher. As teachers, these are things that we do on a semestral basis. This is the first time that you're going to teach. These are main tasks as a teacher. Kaya po yung topic ng webinar natin ay preparing the courses for remote learning. Or as the UP system would call it, it's a redesign. So ibig sabihin po, how can we work around these tasks pero it will fit the context that our learners are physically distant from us. So matrabaho po siya dahil merong reframing at merong added task of more planning. But the task, if you think about it, they're more or less the same. Ito po yung ginagawa na natin. Medyo babaliin lang natin para bagay siya sa remote learning. Okay. So now, ito pong 4 na to, I'm going to present to you some strategies. Some of these strategies are a little bit more global. I tried to look for some strategies that will fit this academic cluster. But again, you know better, no? than I do. So I'd love to hear from you later. Some of these strategies, possibly po, pag narinig niyo, sasabihin niyo, hindi naman yan bago. Ginagawa na naman namin yan before. So, kung ganun po, if these things are not necessarily new, let this be an affirmation of the correct things that you're already doing in your classrooms. So, sabihin po, this is a reinforcement of the strategies that you've probably been doing in class. Okay. So let's start with analysis of learner and learning context. So this is something that we do during the first day, di ba po? So I think what makes it difficult for us is that it's hard to imagine how will it look like? How will my first sem look like? No? So now let's do a little imagining exercise. Imagine the first day of your class, no? Or imagine the first week of your class. So ito wala nang punta-punta ng school, no? You're in your home, you're opening your laptop. No? Ano ba yung, how will that first day look like? And usually po, di ba, pag nasa classroom tayo, our first day is a getting to know you exercise. It's, we do activities, no? We get to know our students a bit, we introduce ourselves, and then we walk them through our syllabi. So it's basically creating it to yung what you can expect for the rest of the sem. So sa remote learning, ganun din po. No? Ganun din yung aasahan sa atin. So the first day is we get to know our students. So ilan po sa mga suggestions nila. Una, it might be good to do a quick survey. Parang a remote learning readiness assessment. No? Ano yung capabilities of our students to do remote learning? Yung iba po, sinasuggest nila yung empathy mapping. No? So, yung idea lang po nito ay we can probably ask our students to share their anxieties, that like what we did in the Mentimeter. What are you most afraid of sa remote learning? We can also share our own pains para alam nila that we're all in this together. This is as difficult for them as it is difficult for us. But also might be a good opportunity to set the tone. I mean, that's what we do naman sometimes in the classroom. Diba? We pretend that we're okay, that things are going to be okay. So it's also might be a good exercise to let them know na, okay, it's difficult, but these are things that we can probably maximize now more than ever because we're remote. Yung isa rin na pwede natin gawin, na importanteng gawin, ay orientation. We need to orient our students. If your students can do it via Zoom or via Google Classroom, then go ahead, meet with them sa first day ng class for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, no? Just to go through the syllabi, or write them a long love letter via email, no? Letting them know what to expect. Okay? Yung isa rin, if you're going to use a learning management system, this might be a good opportunity to practice the elements. So what can you do? So you test it out. You ask your students to do small, no-stakes tasks so that you see their capacity. As simple as submitting an online index card via Uvle or replying to your email. Just to test na and give them a feel na, I think gagawin natin ha. A lot of it is going to be emailing and submitting something online. So for instance po, itong second semester, I asked them to do, to submit to me an online index card. So now I don't require a physical copy, but I make them practice. So I send them this slide, and then I ask them to fill it up with this information that I need, lalo na yung emergency contact, so I can contact them immediately. And then some chika questions para lang fun sasagutin at fun din for me basahin. And then I ask them to submit this via ulit. So then I know sino yung mga students na can easily submit or mabilis sumunod sa instructions, no? Or yung kailangan ng constant reminder. So then. And then also, yung isang, I think na importante na baka hindi natin masyadong nagagawa is to make them assess the time they need to spend for your class, no? Or to make them practice the fundamentals for your class. So for instance, during the first day of my classes, the fundamental task, ako po ay from the social sciences, no? Ang fundamental task po sa amin, nila as a student, ay to read. So I devote some time to teach them how to read. And it might be a taken for granted skill, but I emphasize to them that reading for leisure is different from reading for class. No? So yung how to read can be changed into how to critique or how to provide feedback or how to practice your voice or how to practice your instrument or how to watch a video. So basically, you can replace it with any fundamental skill or technique that students will build on throughout the sem. So for me, importante yung reading, so I walk them through. So I tell them, so you read with intent, not for comprehension. And then I make them feel a little bit good that, you won't get to know everything. That's why I'm here. That's my point. I'm here to clarify things that are difficult. And then I give them a structure. So basically, we cannot expect students to do these fundamentals without any structure. So I ask them, when you read, flag these concepts. So, ano yung bago, ano hindi mo naintindihan, ano yung change in previous knowledge, etc. No? And then, in class, we practice. So I make them read the first page of our very first reading, and then I make them take note of the start time and end time. And then I give them a task. Look for the definition of this. And then I make them take note of things that they find interesting. And then we process that. So then I tell them, how long did it take you to read a page? So if it took you 10 minutes, so yung readings natin, 20 pages. So that's how long you need to devote reading this text in preparation for our class. So at least it gives them the idea na, okay, siguro ito pala yung kailangan kong prep. Well, of course, probably they won't do it, but at least it's a reminder na ito fundamental to. So I'm letting you know this is what I'm expecting you to do in this class. Okay po? So, any questions po that you have so far? Dun po sa ating first task. So, ang first task natin ay assessing our learners, getting to know our learners, and basically it's the same thing. We survey them, and then we give them the structure of how the SEM is going to proceed. Okay? So, I will give you po maybe about 2 minutes. And then maybe Sir Janelle can curate maybe or ask about 2 questions before we proceed to the next.
Okay, Sir Ton. So far, may isa tayong tanong from an anonymous attendee. Let me direct you to the Q&A. So, pwede siguro na sagutin to ni Ton, di ba? Or pwedeng mag-type kayo ng responses niyo doon.
Yes.
Google Classroom was mentioned po. So some faculty members use it, but that means requiring students to use their UP Gmail or the up.edu.ph email. So it is possible. Is it possible for the computer center to ensure that students get the UP Gmail upon enrollment, or at least during the first week of classes? So medyo technical yung tanong na ito, no?
That's an excellent question kasi yung UP webmail po natin is very powerful. It allows access not just to Google Classroom, Zoom, Uvle, CRS, Microsoft 365. Meron po yata tayo taga-computer center dito. So, sorry po that we cannot acknowledge kung sino po yung nagtanong. Thank you po for that. We will bring it up po to them to find a way for students to, pag nag-confirm sila or as soon as they enroll, they can get the UP webmail po.
Okay. So another question from Sir Henry Robles. Do we have a suggested total student learning hours for the 14 weeks?
Yes. Meron po sila. I will get to that later po. Dun sa when we get to dun sa number 2. Point number 2 po. That would be a good segue. Yes. So meron po sila.
Yeah. And the third question from an anonymous attendee. Does each department have a choice on what LMS to use? For example, to minimize the learning curve, can we just use Google Classroom, or are you recommending the use of Uvle?
Ako po ay endorser ng Uvle dahil kasama po natin sila sa UVCAA, ang ILC. But because po yung Uvle is so powerful, there are things that Uvle can do that Google Classroom cannot. For instance, timed exams. Kung hindi po ako nagkakamali, hindi pa siya kaya ng Google Classroom. But to quickly answer the question, may suggested, but this is UP, so ano po yan? These are recommendations, but you are free po to decide as a unit which will work best po for your student. Pero ang ano lang po, ang isa pong, kaya po laging binibenta din yung Uvle kasi meron na siyang privacy systems in place. Yun po kasi hindi natin ma-assure sa iba, like lalo na kung social media, Facebook. Yung Uvle, at least we know that we have a technical team and that they are ensuring that this is a safe space for students. So that's why it's highly recommended but not required. Yun lang naman yung dalawang nire-recommend na INC.
Okay.
Google Classroom. Okay.
Yeah. So last two questions, perhaps, Sir Ton.
Sige
So
po.
what is your take on recorded or video lectures?
Okay. Babanggitin ko po yan sa point number 2. My take is, yes, by all means, if you can, but the shorter the better. We cannot record our lectures for 2 hours. Because as you will notice po, kayo po na makikinig sa amin ng 2 oras, you will hate us for making you listen for 2 hours. So, ang suggestion po nila, minimum of about 5 minutes, maximum of 20. Pero we will get to that po. That is one way of delivering content. Sige,
Okay.
so last question, then we proceed.
Yeah. So ito mako-cover mo din siguro mamaya, pero the question is, how do you deal with students that can access only with paid data and are financially challenged?
Yes po. That is, so ang idea po ay, kaya napaka-importante nung learner assessment or remote learning capability assessment sa first day because this is my personal take po. You don't have to agree with this. The idea is we can plan for what most students can do, and then once we identify those who need more support, then we can devote more resources for them. No? So iba po kasi yung alalay natin for these students than students with more resource. I'm not saying po that I'm not saying that we will prioritize more yung resource-rich students, no? But we're saying is we will have to plan differently for students na limited yung capability. So mamaya ko ipapakita ko sa inyo. Yung pinaka-crude way is mas independent learning with moments of supervision or feedback, or once in a while we check up on them. So again, sorry for that long-winded response, but the idea is we plan differently for students depending on their remote learning capabilities. Okay po?
Okay.
Thank you, Sir Janelle.
Yeah. Mamaya ulit. Pero gentle reminder, if you want to ask a question yourself, pwede ka mag-raise ng hand, tapos i-acknowledge kita para ikaw mismo magtanong kay Sir Ton. Okay? And then,
Okay.
if you, another gentle reminder, meron kaming survey, no? Parang evaluation pagkatapos nito. And may gift si Sir Ton, ikaw nang paliwanag sa kanila kung ano yung matatanggap nila pagkatapos nito.
Sila ng load. Wala po kaming load. Hindi, ano lang po, if you answer po the evaluation form, meron pong certificate of attendance po for this webinar. So, alam niyo na, ano po yan, promotion points.
Thank you, Sir Tan.
Okay po. So now po, let's go to the second activity, which is the difficult part because we have to think ahead in terms of planning content and mode of delivery. Let me begin po with planning content. So dito po, I share with you dun sa screen, I borrowed yun pong learning outcomes ng isang course sa Broadcast Media Arts and Studies. We did this pilot webinar with them, so I'm so grateful. Anyway, so ito yun po yung learning outcome. So when we plan content, dalawa po yung pangahawakan natin. Una, it all boils down to learning outcomes or non-negotiable competencies. And second, guiding principles. So when we plan content for remote learning, we're basically operationalizing learning outcomes. So for instance po, itong BMAS 113, ang kanilang non-negotiable competency, at least when they were planning this, ay produce ethical pre-recorded programs for broadcast. So ang idea po nun, so if that is the learning goal or learning outcome, kaya po, importante na pinapound tayo palagi, ano yung outcome? Ano yung outcome? Kasi mag-align everything else sa learning outcome. So if you distill your course, sabi mo, ito yung outcome. I want them to be able to produce a product. No? So ano yung topics na kailangan natin makover for them to be able to produce? So if I identify na ito yung topics, ano yung learning resources that students need to be able to acquire that knowledge? No? And then, because learning is best when students do it, no? So ano yung mga learning activities that will reinforce learning from the resources? And then, how am I going to assess that slowly they're building towards the outcome that I want them to happen, the outcome I want to see after this class. So one of my colleagues would usually say, dun sa syllabus niya, sasabihin niya, at the end of the semester, we will transform you into students who can. So you want to be able to transform your students to be able to do or produce an outcome. So alignment po siya of everything. So ang challenge po talaga is to start with the non-negotiable competencies now. Kaya pinakita ko po itong Diliman's 113 is because isa po itong production course. And it's a lab course, it's a skills-based course. And it might be good to consider these approaches the same. Kasi ito po talaga yung pinakamahirap eh. So, as I was preparing po, nagtingin po ako ano yung ginawa nila sa arts, ano yung ginawa nila sa music, ano yung ginawa nila sa sciences. No? At ito po yung ilan sa sinuggest. Yung isa, yung split SEM approach. Meaning, is it possible to divide our syllabus such that all the non-technical, non-production stuff can be taught at the beginning, and then slowly, because we are hoping for the best for our country, by the time that the SEM ends, pwede na yung a little bit blended. Ibig sabihin, we can probably do some of the activities in the lab. However, ang hirap sa split SEM approach is that most of our students are probably not in Manila anymore. They're probably out somewhere, so we can't expect them to, go to Manila. But maybe with some negotiations, I don't know. So it has its own pros and cons. So you can discuss with your unit or department or college if this will work. So all non-technical stuff, first half, second half of the SEM, doon na tayo maglalab once or twice. No? Second would be wala po kang ibang term for this, pero yung habol approach, no, yung ihabulin na lang natin yung competency next semester. So, ibig sabihin, kung hindi natin siya kaya ituro the SEM, as a department, can you discuss, can a course next semester devote some time at the beginning to help students demonstrate a particular competency na skills-based. So, hahabulin natin siya sa second SEM, hahabulin natin siya even during the mid-year. But for me, ang aking mantra nga po ay minimize any drastic changes. So baka if there's so much moving parts, baka it's so complicated, maybe the approach can be modifying some of the learning outcomes. So if the outcome is to produce something, is there an outcome that approximates that skill? Can it become like a full-blown script? So if it's a recital of sorts, what can we approximate kaya? Ano approximation ng isang recital? Or ano approximation ng isang production yung pwede nating mapagawa sa students natin the same? So it's not the same, but it kind of gets to that. Kumbaga ma-approximate pa rin natin siya. So, kung hindi kayang approximation, maybe substitute something, no? So, kung hindi produce, ano yung pwedeng ibang verb? Ang outcomes naman po ay, by obidizing, it's all about the verbs. So, what verb can we make our students demonstrate? Or, can we reduce the skill or output? It's still a production, but the production is a little bit more low stakes. The production is a little bit more low key, not as full-blown. And ako nga po, upon reflection, ang naisip ko dito yung the way that TV productions change, the way we consume media. No? So, meron sila mga at-home things. No? So, pwede ba yun? So, it's something that you can tell us, no? If it's possible po for lab courses. Kasi, ang hirap talaga na ipagawa exactly. So, how can we modify para mukhang ganun pa rin yung makukuha ng students? Okay. Ito pong operationalization ng guiding principle. Sorry, it's not in my slide. But how can that be operationalized in our syllabus? It's in the form of our classroom policies. Di ba po usually at the end of our syllabus, meron tayong classroom policies. So decide as a department, kasi it will guide the way you will plan everything. So we always hear about compassion. We always hear about flexibility, honor, and excellence. Are these important for you? if these are important for you, how will that reflect in your planning of your content? How will that reflect in your submission of requirements? And what is the most compassionate thing to do given the resources that students have? Okay. When we plan content, ito po yung very helpful for me na analogy. Kaya po siguro mahirap itong shift to remote learning is because now it's like we're being asked to write an entire textbook. Di ba po? When you look at your favorite textbook, well, first that's pictures and it's colored, and then it can stand on its own. Di ba po? So yung students, when they get a textbook, they can probably learn it even without our intervention. Kasi it's cut into chapters. Each chapter has learning outcomes. It has the text that they need. May break na exercises, no? And then there's like an assessment in the end, and then future and other resources you might want to look at. So I think it's difficult because I have never written a textbook before. No? So I don't know how that works in practice, but it might be a good way to imagine how to plan for the same. It's like we're going to write our textbook for the first time for our classes. And it's tough, no? So we will need the help of others. Yung isa rin ay a modular approach to doing things. Ibig sabihin po, we break down our SEM. So let's say we have a 14-week semester. Pero yung 14 weeks po na yun, 1 week for assessment, and then probably 1 week for readiness, preps, onboarding, etc. So my suggestion is plan 10 to 12 major topics in a SEM, for this SEM. And then one major topic, 1 week. So ganun po siya. So naka-modular yung approach mo. So ang preparation mo, per week. And it's probably what we do anyway, right? So every week there is what students need to learn, there's an activity, there's an assessment, and then you move on to the next topic. So di ba po yung what is good about remote learning is that yung chika, mababawasan, hindi tayo mag-overtime at hindi mag-bleed into the next week yung ating mga topics. So kaya natin siya ma-structure na weekly talaga siya. Ano yung output that is expected to us when we plan content? We've done this already, especially kung nag-curriculum review tayo, an obedized syllabus. The obedized syllabus forced us to plan content in such a manner that it can stand on its own. So, meron lang po siyang additional na kailangan madagdagan. I will show you in a bit. And then we have a detailed course guide. Ano pong ibig sabihin yan? So, think of it as this, no? So now, yung syllabus na ipaplano natin, ipaplot mo, ito yung gusto naming learning outcome. Ilang weeks yung kailangan namin to achieve this learning outcome? Ano yung topics? Ano yung, basically po yung diagram natin kanina, but in tabular format. No? What resources are needed? What activities will be asked students to do? Is there an assessment? Ito po yung dagdag. Ito po yung dagdag sa planning. Ilang oras yung kailangan ng mga estudyante for assessment? Halimbawa, they want students to take an exam, how many hours will that take them? Number of hours for asynchronous session, ibig sabihin, prep time, for instance. To read something, how many hours do they need to devote? Or you have an exercise, how many hours yan? Or will there be a synchronous session for the week, meaning can you meet with them via Zoom or Google Classroom? How many hours will that take? No? So I will show you an example from the college, from, ito po sinishare naman po ni Mang Banji. So I will, I hope you can see my slide. Okay, so this is an example po of what they did for Chem 16. So yung Chem 16, pinlot na nila ilan yung hours devoted for a regular SEM. So usually po 3 hours per week. Pero actually, yung 3 hours na yan, medyo madaya yan kasi wala pa yung prep time ng teacher and faculty. So this is just contact hours. So now, actually, yung suggestion nila, parang dadami yung hours mo eh. Parang magiging siyang 114. Yan. Parang, I hope, sorry if it's too small, but dati, pag face-to-face, parang ganyan nila siya binibreakdown. So may 38 to 48 hours kasi 3 hours per week. But now, we account for prep time. So, dumadami talaga yung workload ng everybody. So, this is very important kasi when we plan our courses, kailangan isipin natin, ilan yung i-check mo? So yan, ilan yung kailangan mong i-prepare na materials? on the student side, and then yung hours that they can devote in a day for like 4 classes or 5 classes. So it's like there's a lot of hours now na offline. So we have to take that into consideration. So ito yung, I actually, meron pong slide si VP Vanji dito. So, AVP Vanji. So, you can check this out kung paano nila ito na-come up with. Pero parang ganito yung breakdown ng isang semester. So, yung ginawa nila, ganito. So, nakaset yung course topic, outcomes, ilang hours yung synchronous. So, I think yan, 1.5. Ilang hours yung asynchronous for that topic. Tapos, ano yung type ng assessment, ilang hours yung sa assessment, anong platform yung gagamitin. So, yan siya. So, ganyan po nila yan pinaplot. Then, you can see how many hours students will need to devote and how many hours you need to devote for your classes. Okay. Let's proceed. Okay. So, ito po yung will be expected of us. And then, ito po yung narinig natin kung nag-attend tayo ng CU-wide. It really is just making things more explicit, no, and available as much as possible early on. So we will be expected to produce a course package. Sounds fancy, but we've done this before. So ito yung, kunwari, lahat ng readings mo, lahat ng assignments nila, lahat ng kailangan nilang gawin, pwedeng naka-upload na siya sa Oble or sa Google Drive or sa USB, no, or worst case scenario, printed materials. So talagang parang textbook or module yung ginagawa natin. So nakasave somewhere in a cloud or in a device, and then that's what we give or farm out to students. So pwede yan all at once, pwede rin weekly. So weekly, basta may malinaw yung schedule para students can also, at ikaw din, alam mo lang kung kailan ka, teaching mode. So pwedeng every week you upload, pwedeng every month, pwedeng if you're super duper prepared, unang bugso pa lang ng klase mo, na-upload mo na yan lahat, and then you're done. I mean, like, prep-wise. Okay. So yung may nagtanong po kanina about ano kayong gagawin natin kapag data lang, ganyan. So, may kita po natin yung mga different modes of delivery dito sa next slide. No? So, again, so yung first major yung bulk of the work will be to plan. Once you have things in order, the next thing to decide is, how am I going to deliver this content? So, hindi na kasi tayo residential. So, this is a very useful illustration. You might have seen this before. So, ito maganda kasi dalawa yung kanyang axis. No? So, yung isa, high bandwidth activities. Sabihin, makain sa data ng mga tasks or yung hindi masyadong makain sa data. Tapos, dinidifferentiate din niya yung high immediacy, meaning mataas yung feedback, mataas yung communication, mataas yung ability mo to communicate warmth. No? So, may low end of the spectrum versus high end of the spectrum. Yung isang ideal, siguro na gusto natin para classroom yung feels ay yung video conferences, audio conferences. Zoom, like a Zoom. But that's high bandwidth, you know that? Pero yung isa din, we can communicate as freely. Ngayon po mahirap kasi we're 139, but if you're like 10 in a class, that's relatively easy. But we don't have to think high bandwidth, high immediacy. No? We can think low bandwidth, low immediacy if that is the best for everybody involved. So like I mentioned, there's email, there's an annotated reading, there's discussion boards. No? If you can, there's a lot of pre-recorded video or audio that is also possible if you can do it. So you parang record your brief lecture and then find a way to communicate with your students. Okay po, so this is, I just saw this online shared by a lot of faculty members, so you've probably seen this, but very, very useful, at least I think, in terms of planning how you're going to do things. So, pag nag-assess ka ng students at the beginning, kaya mo nang ma-determine nasaan sila, at least sa bandwidth. Diba? Then you can decide saang quadrant ka magfo-focus. Okay. In the post-ECQ guidelines that we prepared, we suggest 3 modes of delivery na alternative. Yung isa, yung mostly individualized instruction or independent learning. Ito na po talaga yung very, very, very minimal teacher intervention. So ito po, kailangan talaga nating tanggapin yung ability of students to self-regulate and ability of students to learn on their own. It's not the sexiest and the most exciting, but it works as a least common denominator mode of teaching. No? So kapag independent learning siya, yung preparation natin dito ay hindi na pwede yung nag-upload ka ng slide deck as it is. No, it has to talk to the students the way we talk to them in the classroom. So one way of doing that would be to editorialize your slide deck. So it's as if the students are talking to you through your slides. So then you can put in a little bit of your personality there. So yung isang example ay meron kang signposting slide. So that's what we do rin naman in class. Sometimes we tell them, oh, the first 10 minutes, this is what we're going to do, and then we proceed. So ganun din siya. So i-recreate natin yung ibang elements of face-to-face sa remote. So we signpost. We tell them, okay, for the rest, this is what you're going to expect. It would help to have a reflection slide at some point. You tell them, okay, so bago mag-proceed, think about this question. And then, well, of course they can scan through that, but at least you gave them time to pause and kind of churn what you just presented earlier. Lalo na kung text-heavy like a textbook. And then, I would have additional notes. I would have mentioned orally slides. So itong part na to that you see on screen, sometimes is in my notes section of my PowerPoint, but now I made it a slide because I feel it's important, but it's text-heavy, but they need it before they can proceed. And so I have something like that. There. So it's like, so ngayon, you now talk to your students in whatever form. So it can be a slide deck, it can be a document, it can be an email. So just talk to them the way you would talk to them, but in written form. So mas matagal because it's so much harder to write than to make chika. Okay, so for a lot of lab courses, ito po talaga yung isang sinasuggest nila. In the meantime that we can't be in the lab, we can probably do a lot of demo or a lot of simulation. So itong demo or simulation, pwedeng kayo, kunwari tayo, may access tayo to our lab. We can walk them through the laboratory, how it would feel like to do in the lab. Then we do the things online. So while I was preparing for this, I watched a lot of art tutorials, the art tutorials online. So gumagawa sila ng mga sculpture, pero ang message ay same skill, pero different tools available. So whatever is available, you teach them the same technique, pero yun hindi siya kung ano man yung ginagamit natin for sculpture, halimbawa. So in the meantime, so ang idea po dito, it's like, we can think of it as like cognitive preparation for students. It's like making them watch something and then hope that when they actually do it, they can execute it. Of course, learning is much more complex than that because they need feedback, we need to correct them and see them. But in the meantime, that's one way to do it. So show them first how to do it. And then, kagaya nga ng isa nabanggit kanina, a short video or audio record. Okay. And then, yung isa din pong mode, which I hope I will be able to do next semester, is a combination of synchronous and asynchronous. So for instance, in a week, for example, your course ay Tuesday, Thursday, every Tuesday, meron kang independent work na ipapagawa sa kanila. So it can be a reading and then a short exercise. And then on Thursday, you have a Zoom or Uvle discussion forum or chat forum or email with your students. Now where you kind of give them feedback, or if they have questions, that's your opportunity to answer those questions. So take note po na itong modes na to ay hindi siya lecture. So again, we have to trust that we have structured it enough for students to understand what needs to be done, that they do the work, and then our job is to facilitate it some more or correct some of the impressions or drive home important points. So yung Zoom na yan, yun lang, hindi siya lecture, parang 15 minutes na, o ito yung key points. Nakuha niyo ba yun? And then do you have any questions? So kung walang questions, tapos na yung synchronous session. Parang ganun na siya pwedeng i-structure. And then finally, I think, I may be mistaken, but I think they're already formulating policies for this. Yung blended na tinatawag na part online, part face-to-face, kagaya ng split SEM approach that we mentioned a while ago. But this one would require a lot of justification. Kasi pag isang estudyante lang natin magka-COVID, diba? Everything will fall apart. And then also, our labs have to be prepared. So, kung nanonood kayo ng Magandang Buhay, di ba? Ganyan na yung approach natin. Mayroon tayong mga face masks, at mayroon tayong mga harang sa ating mga estudyante. So, there's a lot of prep. But if it can be done, then why not? At yun nga pong nabanggit din kanina, yung suggested LMS natin yung Uble at saka Google Classroom. Okay po. Meron po ba tayong question so far, Sir Janelle?
Meron na po. So, yung unang question, Sir Ton, is about policy on loading. Dalawang nag-comments nito, pero I'm just going to mix them. The first one is UP open to rethinking policies on loading or units for teaching? Tapos, yung number of students sa loob ng classroom in the context of remote learning.
This has been asked sa, alam niyo po, sa roadshow ng UP system. What yung answer po ay UP is thinking about it, but if there's anything final, wala pa po tayong nakukuha any document. No? So I guess it's safe to say that we can plan for a 24-unit academic year. So parang ganun po yung mangyari. Ganun pa rin siya. Parang 12-12-0 or 9-12-3 or 9-9-6. Yung kainaman naman po ay, and if I'm not mistaken, this is in our post-ECQ guidelines, that the 3 units can be used elsewhere, like yung usual po na routes. So, research, paggawa ng modules, kung hindi, kindly confirm this po, pero kung hindi ako nagkakamali, nasa OVCRD guidelines na yung pagbuo ng modules can be part of an extension service. Pero as with any deloading, there is an output required. So kung it's an extension load, then you will be asked for your modules at the end of the SEM, and it's going to an expectation that it can be shared for the greater good of humanity. So yun po. So short answer, nothing final, but the university is seriously considering finding ways to help ease the burden for the faculty.
Okay, thank you, Sir Ton. Yung next question would be on the modification of the learning outcomes or the reduction of the learning outcomes. For yung kay Ma'am Nina Agkawili. Our program was approved recently. If we modify the learning outcomes, do we need approval of the college, the cluster, the UC, etc.?
Right. Kung tama po yung pagkakaunawa ko, hindi po siya isang curriculum revision. It's really, although I think the university might need to see the plan, what is going to happen, and what are the justifications for doing so. But it's really an internal decision that needs to be documented. Yun lang naman po yung importante. There's no, because ang message po ng UP system sa atin ay units know best on how to proceed, especially with lab courses. So, parang we are given the freedom to modify without going through. Kasi hindi naman po talaga natin babaguhin yung curriculum. Wala naman po ganun. It's just really finding a way to kind of move things a bit. Parang mga prereq, pwede bang yung isang competency ilipat sa kabila, mga ganun po. So, ang kailangan po talagang magplano ay department and then colleges kung kaya.
Okay. Last question. OVPAA said that the complete course packs must be done by September 1. But it has been suggested that we can release our modules weekly. So just for clarification, does this mean that we don't have to have everything done by September 1 and just have the sample syllabus accomplished then and release the rest of the course pack weekly?
I think I will get in trouble for saying that. I think let me confirm po. Kasi ang advocacy naman po ay how do we minimize the work for faculty and how do we lessen their anxieties? So if we're going to force faculty to complete everything all at once without course correction, kasi ano po it's it's a course correction exercise. We present something for the first time, baka mali, so we return. I think the syllabus at the very least is something, but it's something that we do. So I think ang sinasabi lang po doon ay that we have something planned. I think it's important that we're not going into this blind and that we're not going to allow our students to go into this blind. So, well, ako po, I cannot submit, ako sinasabi ko na, I cannot submit my course package at the beginning kasi gagawin ko siya weekly because of the iterative nature of the process. But I will have a tentative idea of all my resources. It's probably written down, and then I will give it to them as we move along.
Okay. May isang nag-raise ng
Pero I will
hand.
confirm din that po, kung ano yung kailangan i-submit at hanggang saang level. Kasi yun nga po wala namang mag-check kundi yung unit at yung co-faculty natin na nagtuturo. Is yung task would be, now that you know what your students are probably capable of, now that you've planned your semester and you kind of decided how you're going to maneuver your semester in terms of delivery, now we're going to curate the resources available to us. So there's so these are resources that are we've curated them before, but now I think ang challenge po is, can we distill some of the things to the most essential such that there's, I mean, we don't overburden ourselves and our students. So there's an illusion maybe that there's more free time for everyone, but that's not true. We're still in pandemic mode, in crisis mode. So ano yung resources, again, that will meet the learning outcomes. Lagi tayong babalik, ano yung pinaka-essential to get to that? So is it a reading? Is it a textbook? Is it a video? Is it a podcast? We have so many resources available. So we maximize whatever it is. Actually, you can create your own, but you can also curate. Parang hindi siya matrabaho. You create what is, curate what is already available, and there are so many free stuff that we can use. Actually, yun po, natuwa rin ako yung parang, halimbawa, yung sa music, isang college of music na meron silang resources on like how to create an e-portfolio, for students na medyo low bandwidth siya, pero ma-assess mo pa rin yung progress nila doon sa particular skill that we're trying to develop. So we now are expected that our learning activities are more detailed, more than ever. So ano po yung ibig sabihin yan? Kung dati, we can get away with verbal instructions, and so now there's less room for ambiguity. When students receive something, it has to be as complete as possible. So for instance, this is I hope it's not too small, but it's an example of a study guide. So may crucial elements. What is the task? What do you want students to do? What are the resources needed? And then we kind of also signpost and prepare students. What should they expect when they watch the video? And then we give them the structure to watch something. I think yun naman po yung message. It's really structuring the experience para hindi any. Kasi if you ask somebody to watch this video and see what you learn, parang it's not very helpful for anybody kasi paano nila yung approach? Meron kang gustong approach na gawin nila. So you kind of structure it in the best way possible, and then you tell them when it is due, if there is something due, and then yung kulang dito sa study guide na to is how they will be graded. Is this a pass or non-activity? No? Is it by 5 points ba yan? How will they get 5 points, etc. No? So when they get this, they will have minimal questions kasi yun nga, you expect that it's so hard to communicate. So just give them everything they need para minimal ambiguity, and then make room for some questions, and then watch it fly, and then give them feedback after. Yung ilang din ng mga learning activities, it's kind of hard for group work now because of the differences in access to the internet, but there are a lot of collaborative activities that we can do. We can maximize Google Docs. We can ask students, instead of, because if our classes would require halimbawa class presentation, pwedeng, or a group report, pwedeng yung report in the form of a slide deck that they will kind of, share and do collectively and then send it to you. Pero dapat editorialized sila. Pwede rin siyang structured discussion forum. Ito yung something that I haven't maximized. So, isip ko, paano nga ba mag-discussion forum na effective? And then yung ito yung reminder, I think, for all of us. Think of an online activity as if you were doing it residential. So, halimbawa, kung gusto mo yung students mo na mag-recite, sinastructure naman natin siya, di ba? Parang, how long should the recitation be like? What is the question like? What is a good versus a bad contribution? So, ganun din yung expectation dito. We structure a discussion forum like in this manner. No? So, you tell them what exactly they need to do para they don't go into a discussion forum blind. So, magko-comment sila. Tapos ito yung kailangan nilang i-comment. So, very, very concrete yung instruction. So, connection, exploration of opinions, exchanging resources, generating a solution. So, now they know. No? So, again, ito po yung constant reminder. Everything is structured, everything is guided as if they can do it on their own. Pwede rin yung structured online recitation. No? So, pwedeng kung kaya mo ng mobile call, or Viber, or Zoom. No? So, na meron kang i-expect na sasagutin nila. No? Or yung ginawa natin kanina sa Mentimeter, pwede rin yun na parang online recitation nila for that course. No? Or yung isang madalas nilang isuggest for lab skills or equipment-heavy courses to think of vignettes or scenarios or problem-based exercises. Because students can't do the task or because students can't do the skill, maybe we can make them critically evaluate something. So parang assumption, they should be able to do a skill. Kunwari, singing. Dapat kaya nilang i-perform yung isang technique. Or dapat kaya nila i-perform isang area. Or kung ano man. No? Then we can probably make them watch a really bad example. Or ikaw, as a teacher, you can probably perform it and then make deliberate mistakes. And then you can ask them, evaluate. Anong nangyari? Bakit pangit? Bakit pangit? Or ano yung mali dun sa nangyari? Ano yung maganda sa nangyari? So then you can assess, can they kind of execute it pero mas cognitive yung approach. So parang ito yung I feel approximation of a lab or a skill that we can do. No? So can we think of scenarios or problems? So may situation, parang field work yan. So ito yung nangyayari sa field or production. Ito yung nangyayari sa production. Tapos may nangyaring ganito or nangyaring ganyan. What will you do? Or what should be the most appropriate response? Parang ganun siya. So if you think about it, a lot of yung mga assessment tools, which we'll get to in a bit, are very difficult now because ito yung mga pure assessments na sinasabi. A lot of them are essays, a lot of them are very wordy. So we have to be very judicious about what we're going to require students to do kasi we need to check that. So, kasi dati if we can get away with 3 exams, now it's kind of more difficult to do just that. Okay? So, maganda mo pag-isipan yung mga scenario or problem-based as kind of a modification of learning competencies. Yung isang nakita ko na maganda nila, although this is more social science, I think. Pwede rin pala to sa Comres. Magbibigay sila ng data for students to analyze. So, we walk them through the research process, how it was gathered, and then show them how it's analyzed, and then you kind of make them do the analysis themselves. So they didn't collect it, but at least may skill pa rin na nakuha or nagawa. Okay. Questions po so far?
Yes, we have 4 questions. The first question would be on the guidelines that the university has with regards fair use of the third-party materials, on like the videos or the YouTube videos that will be used, diba? As materials that we can upload doon sa ating LMS. So, ano yung guidelines ng UP para dyan?
ito po ba ay something that you created on your own or something that you borrowed from some?
Perhaps borrowed it to, like, for instance, you get some materials from the web and then you upload it to Uvle. Ano bang fair
I,
use ng
I think the safest would always be to look at the licensing, kung may po yung mga Creative Commons or if it's something that can be freely shared. Yung mga readings and textbooks, yung medyo tricky kasi technically, yung library natin, kasi magkakaroon po tayo ng systems in place na para students can kind of borrow a book online. I think policies, yung I think for educational purposes, and it's not something that should be disseminated or it's not something that should be sold, students can use that. We can try our best to attain these things, lalo na yung mga journal articles, most legit way as possible. Kung we're talking about licensing of our own work, it's something that the university has to still plan for. Pero may conversations na po yan. Kasi nga, if it's going to be shared with other people, dapat malinaw yung license at yung ownership, kumbaga, of the work.
Okay. Yung next ay comment actually on the remote learning. Ang comment ay, unfortunately, this is not, the face-to-face learning is said to be equal with the remote learning. But unfortunately, this is not the case for some type courses where face-to-face means not only between student and teacher, but between students themselves, and where sensitivity to the other performer is very important. So online platforms are very poor alternatives. Anong comment natin, Sir Ton?
Yes po. Ako, I do agree. Personally, hindi po ako nag-agree that they're the same. Kasi ibang-iba po talaga yung mode. So the best way is to, yun nga po, approximate what we can approximate and modify what we can modify at our level. Kasi tama po, it will not be the same. We will not attain the same things.
Okay.
Iba, I mean, it's difficult and I'm so sorry for that this is where we are, but
yeah, another comment and a question at the same time. Will the OAT provide further seminars on more discipline-specific strategies and questions? Like for the humanities courses.
Right. Ang isang pinaplano po mamaya po I'll show you the next steps and the available resources. Yung isa po ay after, kasi po meron tayong 4 cluster webinars, so general principles. Yung next po na gagawin ay by request po siya na webinar. So we will just have to find a mechanism po na hindi pa po siya in place. So once it's ready, we will release a memo po through OVCAA na the units can ask the OAT to schedule a workshop webinar and then we will go to you po virtually and then let's do something like what we did in Broadcom last time na mas concentrated on your learning outcomes.
Okay. Another suggestion from VP Elena Pernia. The TVUP has produced a lot of video materials that can be used as learning resource for many courses. Titles are available in the TVUP site. So we can perhaps maximize, no?
Thank you for that suggestion. I'm a huge fan of DZUP, so there are a lot of resources na podcasts in DZUP. Hirap lang po kasi we curious, so naghahanap ka rin sobrang daming resources. These are probably good places to start.
Another question, do you have resources for more senior, in quotation marks, members of the faculty who need assistance with technology?
Yan po yung kailangan i-set up pa ng system ng university in the sense that ang isang suggestion po namin is to have parang an office for all the tech needs. Kasi ngayon hindi pa malinaw saan yun eh. So yung isa po ay as soon as there is that office or group or team that is for tech support, kunwari, UVLET tech support, sila yung bahalang kontakin, i-establish pa po natin yan. Yung isa pong suggestion which I will get to I think later, ay to be able to work in teams. Yun po that is the one easy way out. ito po, off the bat, we only have few minutes left together. It's daunting if you do it alone. And mahirap po talaga siya gawin pag ikaw lang mag-isa. Kasi yung hirap mag-isip. Tapos, yung mga resources na alam mo, baka limitado masyado siya. So, ang sasuggest ko nila is, maybe we can work in teams. And when we work in teams, syempre po, ang reminder dito ay, we are co-equals here. So, halimbawa, if you're a little bit more seasoned, and you're paired with someone who's a little bit more, gaining their footing in the academe, ano po yan, parang we have to share the load, no? Walang necessarily senior or walang necessarily mas magaling, no? Lahat tayo may ambag at lahat tayo gagawa, but we have to work in teams. So, halimbawa po, isang good practice that I've witnessed in our department, hinati-hati na po kami into courses, into types of instructional formats, no? And then we work together in building the course packs, in building the syllabus. Kasi kapag kakaganon, nahahati mo yung kailangan mong gawin. And then, but I do understand po that entails a lot of love for your colleagues. That might also entail a lot of trust that you can kind of meet eye to eye. But if you share the same learning outcomes and share the same guiding principles, I think you can sort of work with that. Okay. We're down to the last one. So, ito na po yung idea na how do we know that students learn something? It's a puto sa pinaka-anxiety, nakaka-anxious na task. No? How do we know that they're able to demonstrate the outcomes that we ask them to demonstrate? So we can still use the same high-stakes requirements that we've done in residential. So yung mga high-stakes requirements, usually ito po yung nag-occur sa milestone. Tapos ito yung kadalasang one-time, big-time demonstration of skill or knowledge. No? So ibig sabihin, ito yung mga exams. Yan. So kaya po siya high-stakes kasi high value, itaas yung points. Minsan parang 20% of their entire grade is an exam. High stakes kasi usually yung standards parang correct or not correct. Diba? Unlike kapag yung mga ibang exercises na mas may freedom ka to navigate the grading system. We can still use essays. I think we will be maximizing a lot of essays for this term. Kung gusto po natin na, kasi isang worry po lagi ng mga faculty, paano yung exam? Paano kung mag-cheat? Is there a way for us to know that students are not cheating? So, yung sa ilang mga webinars po na na-attended ko, the quick answer is, there is no way for us to know if students are cheating or not. And in fact, kahit naman residential, there's only so much we can do. So may ilang strategies po silang sinasuggest. Yung isang favorite ko na sinuggest na strategy, modified multiple choice question. So it's still multiple choice, but now they have to explain why their answer is A and not D. And then so you kind of have dito mo makikita yung thought process at makikita mo na hindi lang nila basta kinopya from somewhere, but there was some processing involved. And then yung isang suggestion din po nila for, I'll get to that later. Yung iba ay oral exams. So if it is possible, we can call our students, and then yung exam nila ay one time, big time na oral exam, then that's it. Tapos wala na kailangan i-check kasi na-check mo na. Or yung mga ibang high-stakes requirements like a research paper or a research proposal or, I don't know, maybe a full-blown script, a production. Pero yung sinasuggest po nila kapag remote learning ay low-stakes requirements that occur frequently. So now, because we don't see the wonders in their faces when we lecture, and now because there's limited interaction, we have to track their progress every so often. So it's a big skill. Production is a big skill. How do you break that down such that they're leading to the big task or big outcome that you want them to do? So a lot of the low stakes requirements you can still ask them to do. Short exercises, answers to prompt questions, like a reading memo or a chapter outline, a collaborative slide deck, a concept map, a progress report, comment on a classmate's forum. Yung isang favorite po nila na assessment for online learning ay mga portfolio or e-portfolios. Parang it's a document that compiles what students have learned. No? At yung isang difficulty, I think, sa assessment is that may paradigm shift on trusting that students can track their progress. Parang we give them the structure, we give them the rubrics, our expectations, but that students can also plan. Parang ito yung gusto ko matutunan for this week, tingin ko natutunan ko siya. So may ganun pong parang nag-shift yung tiwala na hindi lang tayo yung nag-assess or may kaya mag-assess, pero yung students also. And maybe we can try that out this time kasi ang hirap mag-assess nang hindi natin sila nakikita. So parang portfolios are an excellent way to do that po through logs, no? Through like parang weekly they can upload something, no? Or we can also ask their peers to do the assessment. So parang workshop style po. No? Kumbaga parang may output, then ipapasa sa isang classmate, mag-comment. No? And what I've learned is that if you give students an example, you do it first. You demonstrate how you expect feedback to be given, and then you have a clear guide on how the feedback should be given. Students can actually do it. And in fact, mas malupit pa sila minsan sa teacher sa pag-grade. Maybe kasi hindi pa nila nakakalibrate at hindi pa nila nakikita yung spread of the responses. But yeah, kumbaga, well, I guess what we're trying to say here is, so the assessment can come from the teacher alone, but we can also share the burden para mas madali yung assessment. Pwedeng student-led, pwedeng peer assessment-led, or mas 360 yung approach. May self-assessment, peer assessment, tapos yung teacher assessment in the beginning or important milestones. Okay, so I'd like to show you po a sample rubric from a structured discussion forum. So I really like this post. Kasi kung alala niyo po kanina, di ba, may instructions siya paano magsagot sa forum. So pinakita din niya, ganito yung hahanapin ko para bigyan kita ng grade. So minsan grading mo pwedeng 3 to 1. Kapag na-hit niya yung at least 3, na-broaden yung discussion, or may reference na binigay, or na-communicate respectfully, automatic 3. Pag isa lang yung na-hit, 2. Kapag walang na-hit, for the effort, 1. Mga ganyan. So, ang importante lang ay alam ng students what is expected of them now more than ever. Kasi pag exam, ang expectation ay just circle or whatever. Just choose the correct answer. But this time, if it's a little more authentic assessment, there's the clarity of what to be expected has to be explicit. Okay, so ito lang naman po yung mga general principles that I'm sure that we've already kept in mind from the very beginning. Now is the time for regular or frequent feedback. So if it's a modular approach at may task every week we give them feedback. Kasi that's the only way we will know that there's progress and that our methods are effective. Second, a clear and explicit rubric. We tell the students what we expect of them. What does an excellent work look like? What does kumbaga, ano yung trabahong 1, ano yung trabahong 2, ano yung trabahong 3. And everything, and then the leeway for us is in between. And then third, a regular, explicit ethical expectations. We cannot expect our students to, we hope for the best. But we expect our students to be truthful and ethical and honorable. But it might be good to also remind them what we expect. So we expect them to do in-text citation and references. We expect them to, yung ibang faculty na honor code, bago mag-exam or essay na parang, ay, upon my honor. Yung parang upon my honor natin, di ba? Every month. Upon my honor, I did not cheat, ganyan, etc. So it kind of, we just cue. Importante lang na ma-cue sila ng mga ethical behaviors. And then, hopefully, yung mga pangako na mabibili na yung Turnitin, yung mga ganyan, will be in place by the time that the classes start. Okay. So, siguro just to wrap it up at para makabit-kabit natin, balikan lang po natin yung learning outcomes ng BMAS 113. Again, for me, I cannot begin to imagine how difficult it must be for a skills-based course to do this next semester. Like to demonstrate a skill, to produce something. So maybe at this point, it might be good to ask ourselves, how much of these can be demonstrated at home? Through a project at home, through resources available at home. Then we calibrate. If they cannot produce the outcome that we expect, can a problem or scenario-based assessment work in the meantime? Can the assessment be a substitute or a demonstration of the outcome? So, you know, so I'm just throwing idea. I don't know if this will work, but like a detailed script maybe or a storyboard, an interview. No? So it's, can we modify the outcome? So if you modify the outcome, everything else will follow hanggang sa dulo, pati yung inaasahan mo na assessment. So now is the time to be a little kinder, you know, to what we should expect from our students, given the circumstances. We're not lowering our standards necessarily, but we're just saying, this is the reality, this is what we have, this is what I have as a teacher. Baka this will do for now. Andito pa rin yung skill, but it's not the same. But let's see what we can learn from it. And ako po, a thoughtful reflection after, for all of us, for faculty and students, will help us refine the process and see, meron naman palang natutunan kahit na hindi perfect, kahit na hindi as exciting as before, but maybe this is something that, you know, there's something we can get out of this. Okay. So, you know, and then I will proceed with the next, with the final slide. So, yeah. So if you have questions.
Yeah, so I think this would be a question pa dun sa last part mo, Sir Ton. What happens now with the performance courses, where the major output is for students to perform together, such as chamber music or orchestra or chorus classes? Will these be shelved for now until physical classes are allowed?
Pag-iisipan ko po yan kahapon kasi mayroon po ako ilang mga kakilala din na recital yung final thing nila, tapos yung nga kailangan may orchestra, taas yung demands. Yung, hindi ko po alam if this will work for your discipline, pero yung pong isang idea is to postpone if we can postpone certain things. So baka we have to make arrangements like baka mid-year, if worst case scenario. Ang pinakamahirap po, I think, ay yung kunwari, terminal na sila this sem. Tapos wala nang next sem. So, sabihin mag-residency sila or mahirap yung nag-build kasi a lot of our courses are prerequisites of each other. The short answer po ay hindi po siya posible, I think, at the moment. At least in the immediate months that will come. We are hoping for the best come November, December. Pero even then, what preparations can they do, di ba po, in that short span of time? So, kaya po ba na sa next semester muna yung itong mga ganitong performances? No? Or kung hindi, mag-work po kaya yung kaya lang kasi nga, yung mga Zoom. May nakikita po ako ng mga sa Zoom na parang orchestra sila pero nasa Zoom, but that again assumes that the student has the equipment. So, if hindi kaya ma-approximate via an online production, then mukhang postponement po is the next thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sir Ton.
Sorry
Next
po.
question will be about the set. Will the students be requested or required to accomplish the set at the end of the SEM?
Yes, apo. Kaya po yun po yung una nating pinakita sa inyo, yung 15 items. Yung table natin kanina, yun yung items ng set. So tatala niyo po, fairness, teaching competence, warmth. Yan po yung i-assess sa atin. This sem. So they will be required. Actually, this mid-year po magsa-start na yung SET.
Okay, last question for this round. Is there an ideal number of students who can collaborate in a remote setup, say
Yes.
for the collaborative project? So how would you monitor or assess students who are asked to work in groups or pairs?
The ideal po ay 2, I think. A pair work is the most ideal because more people will entail more coordination, which is very difficult during this time. how do you assess, I'm not saying po that 2 lang dapat. So, sabihin, see if you can work, if they can work in by pairs. And then if not, 5 is already a lot. I think 5 is a little bit unwieldy for everybody involved because 5 schedules. How do you monitor po? The practical tips would include a progress report. If it's like a major task, like for example, hindi ko pa alam if there's an analog of this in your disciplines, but like we ask our students to do a research paper. So every week, meron po silang progress report na sinasubmit kung nasaan na sila. So the progress report doesn't have to be so elaborate. It just has to be like, what difficulties did you encounter today? How did you solve them? And then where are you at this stage in your development? So ganun po. So depende sa ina-expect natin. Ganun din pwede kadami yung logs or yung progress reports or memos that they have to send. So kumbaga, they just have to send us something to let us know that they're on the right track. And then we give feedback so they know also that they're doing it correctly.
Mm-hmm. I guess one sub question there would be, should we purely grade based on output, or should we also grade the communication between students and professors?
Yun na yun. Ganda
Mm-hmm.
po yun. Yung authentic assessment po, they will always suggest that assess as many skills as possible. So kasama nga po doon yung, pero ano po, kailangan alam nila, nag-gradean sila doon, din sa quality of how they collaborate. Yung pinakamadali po doon is a peer assessment. Because you cannot see them in action. So we will trust that their peers will rate them as truthfully and as accurately as possible. So yeah, opo. Maganda po yun na may feedback din dun sa ibang skills na meron sila. Lalo po ngayon, ang suggestion nila palagi ay we assess transferable skills. Because really, a lot of the things that we do at work, we learn them sometimes on the fly. Di po ba? Parang natutunan natin while we're doing the job. So, minsan yung natutunan natin in college, hindi naman necessarily na-apply. So, yung communication is important. Writing is important. Respectfully communicating with teachers and classmates. Kasama po, grammar even. But they have to know that they're being graded for. Just to share with you a few more resources po, that you can, that might be helpful. Sorry. Okay. We have the post-ECQ guidelines po. It's available in the UPD website. So yung post-ECQ guidelines ng OVCAA, meron pong chapter dun yung prepare ng Office for the Advancement of Teaching. We have some specific suggestions for you there. So you might want to check that out. And then yung UP College of Education po released this white paper on stay well, keep learning. Ganda po nung nung kanilang parang, yung something that we can anchor our preparation. So we want our students to stay well, but to still keep on learning. This focuses on K-12 basic ed, but there are very important values or principles that can guide our work. I love this website. They call it the Oasis. It's an Office of Academic Support and Instructional Services. Ito po ay website siya ng how to redesign or prepare for remote learning. So para siyang open courses, but it's static, meaning no one's going to check your work. But kasi ang idea ng open courses ay may feedback mechanism pa rin. But at least here you get to see an idea of how a structured learning guide will work. Plus, it kind of complements what we've been discussing this morning. Yung ILC Diliman po, meron silang guide on tools for conducting online classes. We can visit their website. They have a series of videos already uploaded. Again, they have a webinar this afternoon. I'm going to attend that webinar also because I have so many things to learn about OVLE as well. And then, so bahagi rin po ng mga reminders natin yung walang one-size-fits-all strategy for this. And maybe that's why it's also difficult because we plan for so many things and we have to try out as many things. So, tignan po natin what will work. So, may usap-usap tayo sa ating unit. it's very important po for us to ask for frequent feedback from students so we can calibrate accordingly. We work in teams. Nabanggit ko na po ito kanina as much as possible. Let's try to enroll in an online course, get a feel of how it is to be a student. So sometimes po, the best way to plan is to know how it is like to be a student. And then, important to clarify to ourselves, what are the guiding principles that are important for us, and then just operationalize them. And I think yung message po ay we'll get through this. It's going to be tough, but yung OAT po, yung ILC and the OVCAA, the remote learning committees are here to support you as much as we can. So moving forward, last steps na lang po. We have a few more minutes to go. We are being asked to do a program redesign. And for me, I think what this means is just to decide which courses we might need to move, which competencies you might need to move about. Then we need to prepare our course packs for remote learning. And then when we can and when we're ready, we might need to migrate the materials sa Ovle. Okay po. And then finally, yan po. So balikan lang po natin yung webinar goals natin for this morning. Thank you so much po ulit for being here. We sincerely appreciate. Paumanin po dun sa mga nakarinig na ito from before, but thank you for being here. We tried to provide a brief context of remote learning. Where are we headed for the next semester? We talked about in detail some of the preparations that we need to make and some of the tips that might be helpful. Hopefully they will be helpful and hopefully they can be adapted to suit the needs of your units and courses. And then we tried as much as possible to address as many concerns as we can related to remote learning. Thank you po so much. So Sir Junel, baka you'd like a quick message lang to our faculty during this time. O, di ba? I put you on the spot.
Di ba? Hindi ko tuloy makita yung video on.
Yeah.
Anyway, yun nga, lahat naman tayo may difficulties, di ba? And ako, I would like to susugan yung sinasabi ni Sir Ton na you have to communicate with your co-faculties, right? Because this journey, we have to do with them. Parang kung may naiisip kang maganda, mas magandang i-share yan sa department ninyo, di ba? And then, sabi nga ni Ton, ang pinakamagandang gawin is to pull your resources together kasi tayo ang may alam kung paano natin i-operationalize itong lahat ng concepts na ito sa mga klase natin. And importante na mag-communicate talaga tayo sa ating mga kapamilya sa department at sa kolehiyo. Kasi, again, mas masaya na experience ito para sa ating lahat.
Okay.
Yun lang.
So gusto po natin magpasalamat kay Sir Junel. Sir Junel, thank you for spending your morning with us. And I'd like to thank the Department of Communication Research for lending you, allowing us to borrow you for the time being. Magpapasalamat din po tayo kay Daisy at saka kay Joy for helping us out. We'd like to say thank you to the Computer Center and the Interactive Learning Center for setting this up. Gusto natin mag-thank kay Will, siya yung tumulong sa atin sa setup. And more importantly po sa inyo, maraming salamat for joining us. We hope this was a little bit helpful and a little bit comforting. We'd love to hear from you. Please take the time to answer the evaluation form. We will send the certificate and sa email that you will provide us. Again, if you have other questions, the email is on your screen. Good luck po. Let's support each other during this time and have a great Tuesday and week ahead of you po. Maraming salamat po.